It's been said that one of the default stations of the human being is one of anxiety, that we are created not only weak, but one could almost also say that we are created anxious. And out of that anxious nature that we all have to contend with is a preoccupation on things that don't really either pertain to us, aren't any of our business, and sometimes those anxieties can become a preoccupation and they distract us from doing other things that we should be focused on doing. And of course, there is the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said, "Husn Islam al-mar'i tarku ma ya'anihi," that the from amongst the goodness, min husn Islam al-mar'i tarakahu man ma la ya'anihi, that essentially from the goodness of a person's Islam is leaving that which doesn't relate or doesn't concern him. Which then always, in statements like these, while they're saying, well, leave that which doesn't concern you, it is in another way saying that there are things, however, that you should be concerned about. So I was having a conversation with a person that was, almost had some self-inflicted wounds, right? These doubts that they were rankling with because they became obsessively preoccupied with the fate of others. What's going to happen to this person, that person? What's going to happen with my, non-Muslim friends? What's going to this and that? And of course, it's also been related to us also in some other prophetic narrations that the Prophet ﷺ warned people against going into areas that they're really not prepared to deal with, because the truth is the truth, right? What we would like is that maybe there is something that we don't grasp or perhaps we just don't agree with, and then we want the truth to bend. We want the truth essentially to bend its knee to us, to conform to our sensibilities. Well, that just isn't the case. So anyway, this person was preoccupied with all these what ifs, what abouts. And I'm like, well, what about you? What about yourself? If you allow yourself to be caught up into these what ifs, one, they also do tend to just be, it's a lot easier to worry about what's going to happen to everybody else, because that will remove you or keep you busy from having to really deal with, well, what's going to happen to me? And the Qur'an, again, tells us what the nature of reality is. And part of the nature of reality is there will come a day very soon where none of us are really going to be concerned about anybody. So the people and the things that we are concerned about, there will come one special day where none of us will be worried about anyone other than ourselves. And while it may be difficult to completely put ourselves in that mindset, nonetheless, it's telling us this is what the nature of reality is, and we should try to strive towards coming into conformity with it. The other thing, and I'm reminded of this narration in Imam Malic's Muwatta, his collection of hadith and prophetic sayings. My feeling is that a lot of these preoccupations about what ifs and why fors and all these other things tends to come out of what I call a solitary mind. right? When you spend an inordinate amount of time alone, not the good time alone, right? But the inordinate amount of time alone where you really either just become a victim of shaitan's whisperings, you become a victim of your own fears, you become a victim of your own anxieties. Out of this, then you become almost a victim of your own preoccupation. So in this one narration, Imam Malik relates this hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ash-shaytan yuhimmu bil-wahid wal-ithnain." Says that what? Satan becomes, he becomes kind of obsessed. He becomes concerned in the affairs of the individual, al-wahid wal-ithnain, right? But he says, فَإِذَا كَانُوا ثَلَاثَةً. But if there are three people, لَمْ يَهِمُّ بِهِمْ, then he's not really so concerned about them. Meaning that, and this is where it's important, again, as we were talking several months ago about developing our own so-called Islamic psychology, that we believe shaitan is real. And therefore, when a person is left inordinately by themselves, learning Islam by themselves, learning Islam by yourself online, and it's just you and Sheikh Google, or you and your one other special friend, and you guys are the Firqa Najia. You two are the saved sect, and everybody else are Mubtadi'een, everybody else are deviants and innovators. This becomes real problematic, and people become depressed, they become angry. It's a lot harder to, in a small circle, so it's a lot easier in a small circle to come up with crazy ideas. It's also a lot easier to become depressed and anxious and angry when you're alone and when you're by yourself. And there is a therapeutic nature to communal living, right? And that, yes, we all do need, periods throughout the day or from time to time that we need time to be alone, to reflect and whatnot. But that's different than being isolated, which just simply isn't healthy. So to tie it back is, I feel that a lot of these concerns about what's going to happen to other people tend to come from people that spend an inordinate amount of time alone, that don't associate, in a group, which is different than a cult. And they then become overly preoccupied. And it also shows that there's just a lack of due diligence of a lot of our community reading this book. It has often been said that, the Qur'an is the most talked about but seldom read book. And that might even apply doubly so for a lot of our community. And that if you're worried about the fate of others, one, there is a consequence to not embracing Islam theologically. We can get into minor differences of opinion, but generally, the Surah Al-Fatiha is explicit. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. What? There is a path that's straight, and there is a path that's not straight, and we are requesting guidance to it. It's not something we can come up on our own. Sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim. There is also a path in which what? You, Allah, God has bestowed blessings upon some people. And then غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِينَ. There are also other people that have chosen to go another path, and it is either enticed God's anger or wrath at them, or it has, they have essentially brought upon themselves misguidance. And there are other verses that attest to this, right? Where Allah says what? And this is from the 42nd chapter again. Beautiful chapter that I've been talking about a lot lately. Surah Ash-Shura. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Where Allah says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ الْجَوَارِ فِي الْبَحْرِ كَالْأَنْعَامِ right? That, and from amongst his signs are the ships that sail, on the ocean, like almost like, tall, like a forest of trees. And that, and if Allah wants to, He can cause the wind essentially suddenly to stop abruptly, and that they would, فَلْيَضْلِلْنَا وَرَاخِدَ عَلَى ظَهْرِهِ, right? That they would essentially almost fall on their backs. And to this, Allah says what? أَوْ يُوقِبُهُنَّ بِمَا كَسَبُوا وَيَعْفُوا عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Right? This is because some people have brought it upon themselves. But Allah is pardoning. Right? Allah says what? This analogy of falling on your side and having the wind taken out of your sails, right? Some people will earn God's displeasure, right? The problem we have is we often think our perspective and our understanding are exactly the same as God's. And therefore, how could Allah do this to A, B, or C person when, according to my understanding and my assessment of them, they seem like a wonderful person? That's elevating ourselves to a level that is just simply inappropriate. But even with people that do that, then Allah says what? وَيَعْفُوا عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. And that He also what? He pardons a lot, abundantly. And similarly, a few verses before this, مَا أَصَابُكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَيَعْفُوا عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Right? And that no calamity strikes you except that it's what your hands have earned, but He also pardons abundantly. And then this gives us here, this next verse, not necessarily immediate, but within the same passage here, Allah talks about people who are not perfect, they're not angels, right? But they strive to stay away from major things. وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشَ وَإِذَا مَا غَضَبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. This also gives us something that shows, so where do we come into account? Where does our agency or our responsibility come in? So Allah says, and then for those that strive to avoid the kaba'ir of itham, right? The major sins, and also those things that are just disgusting, al-fahisha, al-fawahish, right? But also saying, وَإِذَا غَضَبُوا. But when they also become angry, they forgive. This is something we need to understand, that it isn't only about avoiding sin. That's part of it. We should try to avoid sin, especially major things. But also, we have a measure of responsibility to try to control ourselves and also be pardoning, right? And it says what? That وَإِذَا غَضَبُوا هُمْ يَغْفِرُونَ. When they become angry, they forgive others. So we want forgiveness from God. We want to be pardoned by God. Part of that's also going to be in your behavior and how you relate to other people. So there's ample evidence in the Qur'an about the overly forgiving nature of Allah, the overly compassionate and forgiving nature of God. However, because God does take sides, so to speak, and because Allah does reward and does punish, and there's things that Allah loves and doesn't love, and there's people that Allah loves and doesn't love, and there's things He likes and doesn't like, and so on, right? Allah's merciful and punishing aspects are not contradictory. As we said before so many times, this will require a paradoxical understanding, and also, to be quite frank, a de-escalation of who we think we are and what we think our understandings are as they relate to Allah, who He alone Himself will hold people to account, will judge them. And the wonderful part is that He cannot be bought, He cannot be bribed. We can assure that whatever conclusion that Allah comes to, perhaps there's a person that Allah will forgive that we never would, and He pardons him. وَيَعْفُوا عَنْ كَثِيرٍ. Right? Because in His capacity, which is completely beyond ours. We can't imagine it. And likewise, perhaps Allah will punish a person for something that we consider trivial, but in His estimation, it was something major, right? But again, don't despair of His mercy, right? Be part of the group, as we said, right? Even one or two, this is still, you're going to become you will be preoccupied with your anxiety because shaitan will become preoccupied with you. So something to think about as we approach the month of Ramadan and building good habits. So if we are blessed to exit the month of Ramadan, we will inshallah be a better person and a better Muslim than we were before then. Inshallah, I hope that this coming month will be a blessed one for you. May Allah accept from you. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.